any further ado, I'm going to welcome James Dean to join me. James Dean from ESL.
Hi, Sam.
Hey, James, how you doing?
Very good, thanks. I am awake and up. I have a 3-year-old, so from about 5:30 a.m.
You were there.
I have no choice.
It's not that early, 10 o'clock in the morning, is it? Let's be honest. I'm sure we've all been up working for hours this morning, but really appreciate you freeing up some time at fairly short notice. Apologies for that, to come and join us. Love the backdrop there. What's going on in the background?
Oh, that's one of the beloved ESL 1 events. I miss it so much. I miss all events, really.
Yeah, tell us a bit about your events and what ESL.
Yeah, absolutely. So currently, I'm MD of ESL UK, as one of the subsidiaries here. No subtle hints there, but basically in 2012, I founded the ESL UK office, and we had a great run of success, building out the provision of various different services and tournaments to the general esports industry, not just for the local market, but the international one too, because obviously the UK is a great place, a great ground for esports activity. I'm also very proud to be co-chair of the esports subgroup. I have been for just over, well, about a couple of years now, I think. And obviously Sam mentioned that, and I'll come on to it briefly later. But also, quite excitingly, I've been leading UK government's first investment into the esports industry through an Audience of the Future industrial strategy campaign. We ran one of the demonstrators to evolve the fan experience. Obviously, these audiences are very young and they're willing to embrace technology in order to interact. And that's also sort of serving as a demonstrator into the sports industry too. But ESL is one of the largest esports companies in the world. It operates across all continents, and it runs a series of esports tournaments under its own brand, but also white label for game publishers all over the place, including Intel Extreme Masters, which is one of the largest esports events in Katowice, Poland. Encourage anyone to visit that when it all starts again. And yeah, it's been a fabulous journey. And although I suppose COVID has affected us all, we've been quite fortunate to continue operating very much online and evolving our workflows and internal processes in order to continue creating a lot of exciting esports activity.
That's amazing. Thank you very much. So you're a man in the know, so I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you that terrible question of, for you, what's the definition of esports?
And that's always a great question, because obviously people brandish the term quite a lot, and it's not really defined as such in a dictionary or anything. And I think it's the perception of the way in which us as individuals look at what esports could be. The way I see this is that it's very much, or the simplest way to look at it, is very much organized and structured competitive video game play. It needs to be organized and structured because that's what makes it basically evolves an ecosystem. And that ecosystem can be of any size and basically includes at the very basis the tournament, the players and the teams. But of course, that just generally attracts, it creates a level of entertainment which attracts a fan base. And therefore, to the gaming industry, it means that it's a secondary kind of revenue model to some degree, or marketing function, depending on how you look at it, in order to have engage with a lot more people who don't necessarily play with the game.
Interesting.
It's also, sorry.
Go on then, keep going, sorry.
I was just going to say, and also it spans across lots of different genres, and what's really exciting is the way it's sort of converging with traditional sports too, to some degree. So we're seeing, obviously, the traditional video game is in front of a monitor or a screen with some sort of interactive device, a mouse, keyboard, gamepad, whatever. But the likes of VR and AR technology is now evolving that into more of a physical space. So the sort of lines start crossing between that video gaming aspect and then the physical aspect. And I've been looking at a really cool thing recently called Hado, which is a Japanese video game / sport, which is actually 4 versus 4 in basically a physical court, playing basically dodgeball. I think there's going to be more about the gamification of traditional sports with video gaming, and then video gaming also becoming more physical. But esports at its basis is very much, well, you can see behind me the 5,000 odd people who are gathered in the stadium to watch a big screen, basically, of people playing Dota 2 in that respect.
So let's talk about that sort of impact. So thank you for framing what esports is in your opinion. So let's have a look at esports in the UK. So you've got this nice picture behind you of a stadium. Was that the NEC, did you say?
Yeah, there was the NEC back in 2018 now.
So a lot of people turning up to these events in the UK, but what in general is the scene like in the UK for esports?
So the UK traditionally has been lagging behind in the overall international scene. Obviously, it was landed very much in South Korea at the beginning, and it sort of stemmed from there. YouGov did a report recently and determined there was about 4 million people watching or engaging proactively with esports in the UK specifically. But if you compare that to 45% in China, 11% in Germany, 12% in the US, we've got some way to go. That said, the growth is there in the UK, and actually the UK is perfectly set up to operate and encourage talent. We are English speaking. Esports generally is quite English speaking at this basis. So we have had a good track record of talent being born out of UK industry. And I suppose, hopefully, in my mind, we'll kind of hit some sort of critical mass at some point. I think we're seeing signs of this, especially with the lockdown and the fact that esports could continue. The likes of Formula E and Formula One doing their online esports tournaments in replacement. A lot of stuff going on with FIFA and FA and UEFA recently. That sort of encourages that awareness, and I think the big broadcasters are now sort of picking it up here, and then it kind of becomes accepted within the family circumstance, and it becomes a mainstay and something you can enjoy and share. So I can see that, but ultimately, as we all know, the UK is a nation of gaming. So we have that potential, a huge potential, the fifth largest in the world, right? So I think with that and the support of our excellent creative media, event, and obviously service industry, there is this massive potential bubbling through.
So we talk about potential, just a word you used at the end there. So if we say the UK is perhaps a little bit behind, but there's opportunities for potential, where are the gaps? For companies out there at the moment that perhaps looking at growing in the esports space in the UK, where or are we particularly good at anything? And are there?
Yeah, we are. I mean, we're a nation of incredible game development, aren't we? I mean, I was born in the 80s, so I would know. Growing up with some amazing titles going through the ages. We were talking about the game stamps from the Royal Mail just before we started this. But I think while the UK's this massive potential comes from the industry, the esports industry growing globally, I think the UK game developers specifically could seriously consider esports as either the main track for some development or certainly in tandem with their game development. Now, we've seen some really good examples of this. And obviously, there's over 2,500 game developers in the UK, I'm sure. And there's very successful games that have become esports in the UK. And I think Stuart will cover this shortly. But to me, if esports was considered as a serious strategy by a game developer, creating those competitive tool sets, the custom game modes, encouraging player and team stories, that narrative and drama, we all love drama, the balancing and the high skill caps, and working with not just the communities that are playing the games, but also enjoying it from a viewing perspective, there is that huge success to be had, and it's about understanding how that can prevail. And you know, and even by just looking at some of the successful ones, I mean, it's not guaranteed, obviously, and I'm sure there's a big risk in deciding how to develop a game, as also Stuart will testify to. But I think that's where I see the massive potential, because the rest of it's all set up. Basically, we're ready for it.
And given that you've referenced a couple of things around the sort of the developers and the opportunities, let's assume that our audience is predominantly developers, game creators, or people thinking about that. You know, where do they go day one? What's the sort of the contents page? What are the things that they should be going through early on when thinking?
Well, I suppose this is a shameless plug for the esports subgroup, isn't it, Sam? It's at Yuki.
I suppose it could be. It doesn't have to be, but it could be.
No, it doesn't have to be. The key to this is collaboration. Collaboration with the other creative sector. So understanding, obviously, the esports industry is solely reliant on the intellectual property, the games that are developed by the game developers, and then their aspiration to build out, obviously, an esports program, because obviously there's two upsides there. As I mentioned, it's either a marketing function and you're encouraging awareness of the game and helping grow the player base, or of course it's a second revenue stream, which eventually leads into some sort of licensing or revenue model around sponsorships, etc., and direct consumer monetization through merchandise and ticket sales, whatever. So to do that, obviously, it's quite a risk for game developers to say, right, we're going to now spin out new departments within our organization to run esports events and create these ecosystems, etc. But having some knowledge, so what we see is a lot of game publishers will have some sort of esports expert within their team who are helping structure that. And then it's about reaching out to the amazing companies across the UK who can help service and build out that ecosystem with the game publisher or developer. And the UK subgroup, esports subgroup, is a great place to start. I mean, encourage anyone who has an interest to come along and listen to what we have to say. And I know we're planning to create some interesting documentation in the near future in order to help find that way. And of course, Sam, you put this event on as well, which is a good starting point, isn't it?
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Nice little plug for Yuki. I appreciate that. We also have a Discord channel for esports. So really good way of getting in there and just asking your question to all appropriate, potentially appropriate companies in the UK. Sharing knowledge, that's what it's all about. James, that's fantastic. And what else do we need to know about you in the coming months? What are you going to be up to?
Well, I can't say too much around ESL. There's going to be big changes. So I'm quite excited about making a step in a new career. Well, not a new career, but a new direction. ESL and DreamHack will evolve in the UK, which I hope to see more opportunity, even more so for other UK or businesses. And I'll be sort of exploring new avenues, which I can't wait to talk about, to be honest. I've just got to obviously not say too much, especially seeing you're broadcasting this on YouTube and it's being recorded, Sam.
Absolutely. But more importantly, we can find you at all the big events coming up when they start to return.
Looking forward to that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Excellent. That's amazing. Thank you very much, James, for your time this morning. I know time is precious. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much for putting up with my questions as well. And just remember, audience, if you have any questions that you want to send through to me or to any of the speakers, Q&A button at the bottom, just click on that and we'll try and deal with those questions as much as possible. There's a question in there that we'll deal with in a second, but thank you. We'll either respond to them through asking the experts, or the experts will go in there and type in their answers for you. So thanks again, James. And next up, we have Mark Reed. Good morning, Mark. Mark, you're on mute at the moment. Let's get you off mute.
I've now been allowed to be off mute. Thank you. Good morning, Sam. How are you?
Oh, it's all about permissions on this, isn't it?
Yeah. I wasn't allowed in. I wasn't allowed to speak yet.
I can't believe it. Someone in the background is dominating and controlling. How have you been? You okay?
Yeah, very well. Thank you very much. Very well. Yeah, very busy time.
Yeah, that's good. Well, we want to hear about that, but more importantly, we want to hear about your contribution to today's talk. So I'm going to come off camera and hand over to you. And thanks for joining us today. And I'll come back at the end and ask you some questions.
No, thank you very much. Thanks, Sam.
Cheers. Thanks.
I have shared screen, I believe.
All looks good. I can see that.
Oh, you
Learnings
can
from
see
15
that.
years in esports.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Just double checking. So, hi everybody. My name is Mark Reed from Heaven Media, and I was really excited when Sam asked me for my help on this one, as esports is something that is a real passion of mine, and it's something that I felt like I fell into about 15 years ago, and since then spent a lot of that time beating the drum about esports. And I think there has been a real evolution both in the UK but also globally for esports. And I think some of the things that we have seen that have been those catalysts for change in that time are elements that, as developers and people interested in this area of the market, can take some learnings from, I hope. And I hope that some of that insight will get people to have some more context, especially for those of you that maybe have that passion for wanting to develop games in the direction of competitive play, but possibly haven't had that experience to just see that industry evolve. So for me today, I want to talk a little bit about that and hopefully help give some things for you to think about in that regard. Also, I would like you to note that when you've been doing it for 15 years, you do get to spell esports however you want to. Much to the dismay, I have to say, for anybody that works for me under the age of 30, as I'm often chastised for, but one of the benefits for that. So I guess I should probably start with really, why do we know anything about this space? Because today, Heaven Media is a marketing agency. So we help game developers and publishers and hardware brands manage their social media, their community channels, their content, help them find influencers, team sponsors where applicable, events, more digital today, but we know that they're coming back in their physical form at some time. Video animation, and now have also Europe's largest gaming PR team as well, that we're now expanding over to the US. We have teams, or we have a team now of 80+ people across Europe, North America, Australia, and China. And I guess our responsibility for our clients is really to help them shape what their audience wants to hear, and it's not always in line with what they want to say, so it's really just helping them shape that narrative. I think also helping them understand where the conversation actually is, or is best for their game or product. Now, as I said, 15 years, but we kind of woke up one day about 7 years ago and realized we're an agency. But I want to talk a second about where we were before that, because 15 years ago, and James Dean, who you just heard from, will know this, as we were very much friends and dealing together back then. At that point is when I started by acquiring a number of websites, so media companies. One was called Driver Heaven, which I quickly changed to Hardware Heaven because nobody actually knew what a graphics driver was. And I also acquired 4 websites, CAD-Red, Tech9, a website called ECL, and Crossfire. And through that, learned really a lot about the esports market. And I also learned what to do and what not to do. As a great example, in my aspirations to develop what I visualized as the Sky Sports of esports back 14, 15 years ago, I thought that putting all of those websites together under one umbrella of Esports Heaven, which does still exist today, and putting 4 communities of esports gamers together, that I could start down this journey of my Sky Sports ESPN for all things esports, only to find that when you put 4 very different communities together, you just end up with one very small one, as they all leave and find a better home where they can talk, discuss, and relate to those people that play the games that they like to, and not hang around with others that don't. So I suppose, why do we know anything? It's probably because we've made most mistakes that you are probably likely to make it at esports. But through that journey of the last 15 years, I think that we understand the audience and understand what they want, both from being associated with a brand, but I think hopefully for the context of this discussion, also what makes a esports and competitive game. So I'll just watch this for a second, because this is my kind of meditation, really. But the reason for showing this is that whilst Pong, I'm not sure, was ever heavily played competitive, and I'm not really going to profess this to be the first esports game by any standards, but the reason why I love this is it's probably one of the earliest examples that I can show of a game that is incredibly well balanced, possibly one of the most purest in that regards. And that's what I would like for many of you thinking about esports games, to understand that, and I really can't say this more profoundly enough, that if a game is not balanced, then it is impossible to be an esports game. We can't develop a game where we have the ability to buy faster boots to make you run faster in your gameplay, or a big gun or BFG to overpower the play. That there can't be any quick pay way to avoid the grind. It just needs to be balance, and where the only way to win is simply you. It's the person behind the controls, the decision making, the reactions. It really made more simple if we think about it. That's how sports works. It's the same field of play the world over, and it's skill and hard work, where the winner can come from anywhere. And we'll come back to this point in a bit. Again, our history of esports, and really the evolution has not been a fast one by gaming standards. Esports games were played more than, frankly, most other games, but they never hit the headlines. They were not something that was talked about in any of the mainstream gaming press, magazines, or even early online. And it begs the question, why? Well, one of the reasons is that, frankly, it's PC only. They existed on dedicated servers, and there was no revenue really there for those big, horrible games publishers that really only wanted to push out another version of Tony Hawk or Guitar Hero. And frankly, until Twitch came along, there wasn't really any central point where you could see the scale or the size of this audience. I remember talking to people in early to late 2000s about the size of the Counter-Strike audience, or this game League of Legends as that came onto the scene. And frankly, I was looked at or regarded in disbelief. And physically, they didn't believe me, because there wasn't that reference point to be able to then go and prove the size and scale of that audience. Even though we knew that these games were being played by tens of millions, frankly, no one cared. But what I want to spend a little bit of time on, which I think is most interesting, is where these games came from. Because one thing is for sure, they never came from a position of a game development team that wanted to set out to build an esports game that in the future would be played by large teams, multi-million-dollar franchises on large scale stages with fireworks and streamed to millions of people on multiple devices. If we start with something such as Quake had a mod that was called Quake Team Fortress, which was then copied by a little company called Valve to make a Half-Life mod similar to that called Team Fortress 2. And spoiler for that probably wouldn't have made a way for the likes of Overwatch. Counter-Strike is a mod from Half-Life 2. If we look at the MOBA scene, which is one of the largest genres in gaming, that was defined by a mod for StarCraft. If we look at Warcraft 3, there was a famous modder called Carl Summer who released a mod for it called Defense of the Agents, so also known as Dota, and that's back in 2002. One of them went to work for Valve and made Dota 2, again one of the biggest esports games in the world. Now, we're here to talk about esports, and I would say that my personal opinion is that battle royale games is more on the periphery of esports. But as Krafton is now worth $8 billion or so, I thought you might not mind a little bit of a tangent, again, to try and give you that insight to that mod evolution of some of the games that are most loved today. So DayZ, for those of you can remember, a huge game, or even still is to this day. And before DayZ was its own game, it was a mod of Arma 2. Now, a gentleman by the name of Brendan Green's BR mod began as that Arma 2 mod, and when DayZ moved into more of a standalone game, Brendan shifted it to a mod of Arma 3. A few years later, was hired as a consultant for H1Z1's Battle Royale mode, or King of the Hills, many of you might know it as. And then Brendan Green, also known as Player Unknown, joined a small South Korean developer called Bluehole, and the creation of PUBG and the rest, as many of you know. So I think that modding element is something that is incredibly important to understand from the development of esports. And hopefully I'll come on to explaining a little bit why now, because it's about what it tells us. Now, it could tell us that the best game developers in the world are a bunch of part-timers that can't get a job as a developer. But I would see it probably more so that what is it that made them go out there and build these games that are still played? And when we look at League of Legends and Dota and Counter-Strike, some 10, probably more like 15 years on from when they were originally developed, getting close to 20 years with the likes of StarCraft and original Dota. And for me, these games never needed millions of dollars to make them great esports games. And I actually truly believe that actually of any game. I think if you put community at the heart of that game, then you will always end up building a game that will win. And esports, for me, within all of gaming, have probably one of the most focused, often most critical gaming communities that you can get. Now, again, if we think about how that modding of the community to help build that game has ended up with these games that are still played in their tens of millions, and in many circumstances in excess of 100 million people that play those games, we can see that we can look into the reasons as to how that those games were evolved. And we know that they were the ones that were going to be playing the game. They were building it for themselves. They didn't often take that that position that you often find with game developers, where they're often building it for someone else. Now, I'm not saying that games developers often aren't passionate about what they're building. They almost invariably always are. But when games were built from mods, it was for them to play. It was a project. And through that process, that it was also meant that they were the ones that were testing it. So they were the ones that were also themselves, and that community were the ones that were responsible for getting it polished. It wasn't the game testing house. It wasn't the closed beta. It was themselves, and they were their own biggest critic in order to get that game polished off. Then thirdly, they will be the ones that will lose unfairly if it wasn't balanced. So when you speak to a lot of those people that were those earlier modders, Carl and Brendan, they would always tell you that for them, they wanted something that they knew they weren't going to get their ass kicked unfairly in, and that gave them that drive to make sure that it was balanced. I think lastly, they exist within that community, the community that helped them build it, helped them polish it off, and helped them play it. And I think often what we see as a very moaning, grumpy, hater-filled community are going to flame the hell out of them if they don't get it right. And that's a definite kind of carrot and stick, because also they also get hailed as the hero, the kind of Tony Stark, as it were, of the community, if it was done right. And that motivation that transcended anything to do with revenue, finance, and payback is what I believe really helped them make games successful and fit the audience, fit the community, and really provided that authenticity and provided that credibility for those games to be successful. So look, was it blind success? Probably in a way, yes. I don't think it means that you can't be the Donald Trump or Gordon Gekko on the inside wanting to make your game take over the world. But it certainly means that you need to make sure you're a bit more Greta Thunberg, Keanu Reeves on the outside in order to really make sure that that community knows that you're doing it for them, or indeed you're one of them. And if I relate that back to my own business, Heaven Media is about making sure that when we're helping brands come to market, that they have that authenticity and credibility, that the things that they're saying show that they are one of them. I think also to leave you with is that balanced element that I mentioned earlier. It will get you if you end up rushing to have that little bit of DLC pushed out at the last minute. Mind you, who am I kidding? You guys love to do everything at the last minute, but we just need to be careful that you don't turn Pong into, I don't know, Star Wars Battlefront 2. It's important that through that rush to add more features and to add more what you believe benefit doesn't take away from that purer side. And it can, and you can still create fantastic games through that. But if it's looking for that competitive play, dare I say, an esport one day, then those are the bits that unfortunately will be the elements that will get rejected by that community. And it is that community, as we heard earlier when James was talking, that is what will make it the success. It will give it that inertia in order for that to that game to have that longevity of games like Counter-Strike and Dota and League of Legends and even StarCraft, but also have people continue to passionately play and evolve an ecosystem around it. And lastly, it really is those kind of that key mantra of learning to listen. And looking to evolve that product over time and at any stage, before, during, post-launch. And as I put there, even pivot. Some of the best games started off as one thing and then turned into something else. Who knows? You might be thinking about building a race game, and trust me, iRacing in esports is only getting bigger and bigger. But you know, it's okay to pivot. Maybe those racing cars can hit big oversized footballs, say, and shoot in a goal. I don't know, but it is okay to be able to change that if the community are able to kind of push you in that that direction. So that is all that I have for you. And I really hope, even if there's just one person today, that helps, that context the last 15 years of how some of those games have found their success, sometimes and often by accident. That I hope it helps someone in their career, in what they're developing or working on at the moment, or maybe in the future. Right, Sam, that's me done.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mark, for that. A quick spin through 15 years. That's amazing. Thank you. There's been a couple of questions in the chat that I think you might want to help us with, if that's okay. Really interestingly, a question that's come through from Daniel around whether esports should be considered as a major sports event. You made that link earlier in your very long in the presentation about it. What's your sort of view on esport as a sport? Do you think it should be viewed in the same way that major sports events are viewed?
I think it's a really good question, but I also think it's a question that probably just shouldn't be answered anymore. And I don't mean that to be facetious, but the fact of the matter is that sport is played by people for a love and a passion, and that's exactly what these games are. Esports is now watched in most parts of the world and almost generically across the globe more than almost every sports. All the data will show you that. We have Twitch now, we have platforms where we can measure through data exactly that reach. It is bigger than it. I think the challenge becomes when a bunch of 30 or 40-year-olds, and I'm 45, so I count myself as one of that, try to make it fit what we know. But it isn't what we know. And again, it's just a personal opinion, get very bored of people telling me that it should be in the Olympics. Why? It doesn't have to be in the Olympics for it to be a legitimate, credible, exciting sport. Just because the Olympic Committee has their view on what a sport, what makes a sport and what doesn't, and all of the arguments for physicality within sports, but I don't see anybody saying that that chess and many other different mind games that are incredibly, unequivocally great sports are not a sport because of the fact that you don't have to get up and exercise for 5 hours a day. And actually, I think it's quite disrespectful for those athletes that are in esports that rely on fitness and nutrition to be able to be mentally ready for some of the competitions that they face. So for me, it is a sport. And actually, I think more and more so as we get through the next 5 or 10 years, that you'll have media companies just adopt esports as what they lead with sports. And it will be a parallel to the football that we watch, the Olympics that we watch, or the Super Bowl that we watch.
Oh, I do love the Super Bowl. Thank you for referencing that. Just final thought from you, if you don't mind. You talk about sort of the building community and the authenticity of this. That's a word we often hear when we talk about esports. How do you actually get authenticity? How do you earn that as a studio making a game? How do you get that sort of validation from the community?
It's easy and really hard all at the same time. And it's down to the approach that you are willing to take, or more importantly, can take naturally. If you can take it naturally, it's the easiest thing in the world. If you generally are a bunch of gamers who love games and love the game that you play and can't wait to engage with the audience and the community and listen to them and give back and do some cool things, and that, then it just happens. If you look at, I know it's not a game, but if you look at the approach that Discord took, something that has essentially taken over the world as far as the gaming communications tool, they were just freaking cool. They were just a bunch of gamers that knew what gamers wanted and went out there and built it for them. They didn't spend millions of dollars on marketing. I know I have had them as a client. They don't bugger all. The fact of the matter is that they gave the community something that they wanted. Now, the challenge is, if you're coming at that from a very big corporate publishing background, you're going to have a hard job of doing that. When you look like a corporation of a bunch of old white bald guys, you're going to have a real challenge to drive that authenticity, that you generally are someone that hangs out on Reddit, uses Discord as your default communication tool, and can't wait for the next cosplay event. You're going to struggle with that thing. So it's about trying to find the ways in which that you can have that engagement that just validates that. And it can't be one thing. You can't get it right on social and not have a good influencer strategy, and not be present at events, and not have the right kind of communication channels as well. You need all of those things. You can't just do one well. Sam, do you mind if I answer David's question with regards to inclusion within esports as well? Because it is something that I'm massively passionate about. Depending on where you go, the accessibility into esports is pretty easy, because esports is that sport where the next champion can come from anywhere. And in that regard, I love its accessibility. What I don't like is there's no clear path through from someone starting from my daughter's age, who is 13 in 2 weeks' time, where she can go to join to then see that natural progression through. There are starting these kind of academies coming through, but that big chasm between I want to play for a team and actually getting any chance to do that is undefined, and it's not easy. But this is still new. We will get there. What I do love about esports is that when it comes to gender, when it becomes to anything else, there is no barrier. There's no thing with football. I guess as much as it frustrates me, my daughter will probably never be able to play for Manchester United on the same field as the other guys. In esports, she can kick anybody's ass. And because of that, she has every right to be within a team of mixed gender, to be able to play at the highest levels. And I think because of that, it's what I love about esports more than I love about traditional sports, because that gives that accessibility for anybody to lead the world in any of these games. And frankly, there are some fantastic work that's being done on with controllers and other methods for getting people that have physical disabilities into esports as well. And some of them have proved to be incredibly successful within esports, even with some of the disabilities that they have. So for that kind of accessibility into esports, whilst it needs to be better defined and it needs to be better controlled, and I think there needs to be more responsibility taken for that kind of protection of people, whether it be because of their being young or female, or of an ethnicity, so there aren't the challenges that we have seen within esports as people come through the ranks. With those right controls, actually, I think it can be one of the most accessible sports on the planet.
Amazing. That's great messaging. Thank you very much for your time today, Mark. Really appreciate it. As insightful as ever.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Sam.
Now we'll turn your camera off and move on to our next speaker. Thanks again, Mark. And I now invite Catherine to come and join me. Catherine.
Hello.
You all right?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you very much. And enjoying this event. We've learned some insightful stuff so far. No pressure, but I'm going to hand over to you to continue that flow of conversation, if that's okay. So
definitely. And what's a good start is it seems that Mark and I agree on most things. This isn't going to be completely jarring what I'm going to talk about.
I don't know. A few disagreements might get the debate going, but okay, let's stick with a positive attitude. Over to you. Thank you very much.
No worries. So let's. There we go. Should be sharing nicely there. Are we all good?
Nothing yet.
Oh, okay. You got to have a bit of technical difficulties in order for these sorts of events to be legitimate, I feel.
Well, that's shown by my bid to get some PowerPoint slides on earlier that were just jumping around everywhere.
Okay, let's try that again.
Right, we're there.
We go. Are we there?
Wonderful.
Fantastic. Yes.
Okay.
So yes, Thank you for your patience, guys. As I said, it's not a webinar unless somebody has some technical issues. So I'm glad we've got that one out of the way nice and early. Little introduction to myself. My name is Catherine Bygrave. I have over a decade of experience within the gaming industry, mainly on the publisher side. So I spent quite a while working in the commercial organisation within Activision. But I now, as you can see, am at Gfinity, heading up the publisher and developer relationships here, because it's extraordinarily important that we have good relationships with people such as yourselves, which is one of the reasons I'm here today. So founded in 2012, Gfinity has really strong foundations in esports and competitive play. We have run loads of events, from sort of a massive pro leagues to the smaller grassroots tournaments, using our own tournament platform. Plus, some of you may have actually been to our arena in Fulham, which, as you can see some pictures of there. Our expertise over the years, though, has evolved to include the community engagement. Mark's made some really good points about the importance of the community engagement side of esports. And we ourselves have an audience of millions of gamers across our channels. And ultimately, our goal as a company is that we want to make sure that everything we do is fun for the players, is beneficial for our clients, and ultimately is enriching the time that people are spending within the gaming space, whether that's playing, watching, or however they want to be getting involved. So when you think of esports, this is kind of the image that you think about. Massive arenas with pro players, huge audiences, fancy productions, big sponsors. And you're not wrong. It's true that there are massive sponsorship deals to be had, the likes of Red Bull, Coca-Cola, mobile carriers, car manufacturers, they've all got involved. There's big money flowing around in the esports scene. But the downside is that these tournaments cost huge amounts of money to run. Multi-million-dollar prizes are not unusual, not to mention kind of the cost of actually running the tournament, the production, the broadcasting, all the staffing costs. And even the big games and the massive publishers have struggled to kind of make it viable and sustainable. But what I really want you guys to take away from what I'm going to talk through today is that you don't actually need to spend big to take advantage of the benefits that esports and competitive gaming in general has to offer. And the reason of this, and I'm pleased that James and I have a similar definition of esports here, is because basically grassroots tournaments and esports are the same. If we look at the kind of the core foundations of each, both grassroots and the full esports tournaments have, they have players, they have tournaments, and they have prizing. The difference, and the way that I personally see it, is that esports has the scale. They've got the pro players and they've got the viewership. But what's really important to note is that professional esports really is a natural progression of a successful grassroots tournament. Fundamentally, they are the same. It's just how many people are watching it and how many pro players that you have. Now, Mark made a really good point about not wanting to pigeonhole esports along with traditional sports. And I certainly agree with his assessment there. But I think it is important to take learnings from our traditional sports. So let's take a look at football here in the UK. Yes, you have the top tier of the Premier League, but it's only really made possible by the multiple leagues below. The existence of these lower leagues and the ladder system makes the Premier League feel more accessible. You have the threat of promotion and relegation to be adding to the drama, something a certain Super League would do well to remember. But if you look at that lower end of the pyramid, you can see that the natural leagues and amateur games really are the bedrock of this entire system. You've got groups getting together for a kickabout with no hope of playing in the Premier League, but they're having fun with the game regardless. And that's because it all starts with competitive players. So moving this actually back to gaming, we know that 9 in 10 competitive gamers are playing more than 2 hours in an average session. Plus, they're twice as likely as a casual gamer to play for at least 5 hours in an average session. These gamers are playing your games more, and they're playing them for longer. And we also know, kind of anecdotally, that these players are generally more engaged with your game as well. They talk about your game, they're watching YouTube videos, they're watching Twitch gameplay, they're cheerleading your game. You know, they're not just playing it, they're involved in other aspects of their lives as well. And when they are playing, they're spending more money. So there's a real tangible benefit to this as well. You know, you can see here that the competitive gamers are spending more likely to spend money every month than, you know, casual or even esports viewers. And 40% of them are spending more than $25 a month on games and in-game purchases. And apologies for this being in dollars, but that was where the stats came from. And they are twice as likely as casual gamers to spend money on gaming accessories. And although these stats happened to record it in dollars, I should note that these numbers specifically were for the UK. So what I'm saying here is to focus on the foundations, and then pro leagues will naturally follow as your game scales. So, you know, let's have a look at kind of a few things that you guys need to be considering when you're thinking about, you know, how is this all going to be fitting in with what I'm doing with my game. I think the most important thing here is to really think about how your players will play and what makes it fun. You know, Mark made a great point about the importance of a balanced, fun game. People are playing your games because they are fun. You know, again, you might assume only certain games like FPS, fighting, sports are relevant here, but that's simply not true. You know, what about speed running? You know, I mean, I remember doing Sonic speed runs when I was younger. People do it on Mario 64 and on single player games. You know, it's quite a passionate community. It's certainly not what the developers intended, but that's how the players are choosing to have fun. They are playing because it's fun. Grassroots tournaments should enhance that fun. We shouldn't be shoehorning in competition where it simply doesn't work. So again, this happens to tie quite nicely with what Mark was saying. You know, think about how all of this is fitting in with your overall engagement strategy. You would be amazed at how many people come to me saying, I want to run a tournament, and are surprised when my response is why. So often our clients are not considering kind of how a tournament is going to support their overall goals. And, you know, as mentioned earlier, it's very easy to throw a lot of money at this and you know, you run this amazing event and then afterwards think, what did we actually get out of that? So yes, you know, obviously here at Gfinity, we think that grassroots tournaments and pro leagues are a part of the community engagement strategy, an important part, but there should be other elements supporting it as well. You know, you should be talking to your community about the latest game news, game hints and tips, you know, help them play the game, help them find the fun. You know, you should be encouraging discussion. As mentioned, these competitive players are real cheerleaders for your game. You know, encourage that, get involved with that sort of chat. You know, you should be talking about the latest tournament highlights. And again, this doesn't need to be a pro league. You can just be talking about something funny that happened in a grassroots event, kind of, again, the way football does with the minor leagues. User-generated content we know is absolutely huge. You know, this is essentially free marketing for you guys. We should be encouraging it. You should be seeing how your community is getting involved with your game. And you should be rewarding them for getting involved as well and incentivizing it. And this leads on to the next important point for you to be considering when you kind of want to go down this route. And that is about rewarding grassroots players regardless of their skill level. When we at Gfinity were trying to crack the best grassroots formula, we did a bit of research within our gaming community around what put them off tournaments. And the most popular answers were long run times, toxic opponents, and skill level. So tournaments were dying because they were simply not fun and there was no incentive to continue. Players were seeing the same winners week in, week out, and just kind of got bored with it. But what we have found is that you can avoid this and you can maintain that fun by rewarding the players for engaging with the game the way that they want to. You know, so of course, reward them for getting involved in a tournament, but tie that in with rewards for actually just playing the game on their own, for completing in-game challenges, you know, reading the latest news. It doesn't even need to be gameplay, sharing their content, and watching esports as well if you have leagues to that levels. And you know, I want to be super clear here that by rewards I don't mean cash. I mean things like community badges, in-game cosmetics. You know, you don't need to be spending huge amounts of money on this kind of thing. And we know how much gamers love sort of the in-game smaller rewards. And in fact, if you want to run bigger tournaments with physical prizes, then to be honest, accessories and components are the way to go. Again, when we asked our audience what they consider to be a high value prize, only 2% of our community said cash. And incidentally, even less said a PS5. Instead, by far the most attractive prizes were products and components from, you know, unsurprisingly, NVIDIA. I mean, we all want a card at the moment, but, you know, from NVIDIA, Logitech, Asus, Razer, you know, it was those sorts of accessories that our community was saying that's what they valued the most from these sorts of tournaments. And then the last thing that you should be considering is, of course, the features within the game. And you might be wondering why this is last. And that is because, as I said, you should be thinking about the earlier points much prior to thinking about what your features should look like. You shouldn't be shoehorning features in that you don't need or that aren't going to complement the play style. First, you need to really sit down and have a think about how it is your players want to play your game and what makes it fun. And then consider popping in a couple of basic features to support that. Again, it doesn't need to be, you know, spectator cameras or anything really fancy. It could just be a leaderboard. It could just be a little timer for speed running in game. You don't need to throw tons and tons of features. There are tournament platforms out there, obviously ours, but there are multiple other tournament platforms out there that can do that for you if you get to the point of needing additional support. But by including the basics, such as, you know, leaderboards or timers, you can run things yourself and you will have the foundations for bigger programs in the future, because esports will grow as your game grows. I said it before, I'll say it again, you don't need to spend massive amounts of money for this. By laying the foundations, you'll be in a great place. As your game grows, your approach to the tournaments is going to scale along with it. I think a great example of a game doing sort of everything that I have spoken about here is one that you may have heard of, a small game called Fortnite. So not only have Fortnite gone from being kind of a small, lesser known title to, let's be honest, a global phenomenon, but they've actually managed to sustain it, which at the moment is quite difficult to kind of keep people's attention. You know, they have these foundations in place. They have their big leagues, sure, but it's supported by an accessible grassroots tournament and reward programs as well. And they tie this all together with news hubs, you know, detailing the latest in-game happenings, the latest tournament highlights. And again, it's kind of that two-way communication, with esports being part of that. So to summarize here, you know, the benefits of targeting those competitive gamers through sort of a grassroots and community program is clear. And what I really want to emphasize is that these benefits apply regardless of whether you end up with a full esports program or not. So it's absolutely worth doing sort of in the early days. You know, you're going to be deepening engagement with your players, keeping them playing your game for longer. You're going to have that two-way community dialogue. You're going to hear what your players are actually enjoying and adapting. And again, you know, Mark made a great point about pivoting. You know, you'll be able to see how people are getting involved in your game and adjust sort of your next updates based on that. You can also potentially be reviving those lapsed players, you know, introducing them to more of your games. Perhaps you have one community over here and you're launching a new game. If you've already got the communication and the dialogue open with them, you can just let them know that you've got your other game launching. You're of course going to be talking to those active spenders in your community. As I mentioned, those people are the cheerleaders for your game. So you know, you want to be keeping up that communication and keeping them engaged and keeping them happy. And ultimately, not wanting to sound cynical here, but you're going to be driving your post-launch revenues, which is always going to be beneficial. But you're going to be doing it in a way that is organic. It doesn't feel like corporate sellouts. You know, gamers, and again, this is kind of an anecdotal thing that we see through our community, but gamers don't actually mind paying for things. But where you start to get the pushback is when they feel like they're paying for too much. If you're selling them a really expensive full price game, and then on top of that a £40 season pass, and then on top of that in-game cosmetics, at that point they start saying, come on, like we just want to play the game. But it's okay for you to be talking to them about supporting you and supporting your game. And by having that dialogue, it will feel organic. And if you're going in with that approach of what tournaments are going to make this fun, how can I be giving back to my players and keep them playing, gamers will be more than happy to get involved in that way. So as I mentioned, we do have an engagement platform, which is currently used to run everything from kind of small singular events to kind of fully bespoke, completely integrated kind of community solutions and all the things that I've talked about. But don't worry, I'm not trying to sort of push this all on you. There are definitely other platforms out there. The reason that I wanted to mention this to you guys is because I wanted to let you know that we're currently working on a massive update, which will allow developers to run sort of fully branded, automated tournaments that click of a button. But as I'm sure you all know, we need to test it before we can roll it out. So if anyone is interested, we would absolutely love for people to sort of test this out and let us know what you think about it. Of course, we'll be showing our appreciation by offering testers sort of free access once the update goes live, etc. But if you want to hear more, then please just give me a shout. But in general, if you want to have a chat about anything, then just reach out to me directly. I am a big nerd. I love just generally chatting about the industry and chatting about games. So if you want to just drop me a mail and just arrange a chat, give me your insights, your views, I love to hear it. So please do feel free to reach out. And I think then we can move into some Q&A if anything's come up, Sam.
Wonderful, Catherine. Thank you very much for that. Particularly like the idea of rewarding grassroots players. I mean, it's something that people often overlook and don't consider. So that's excellent. A really good summary. Thank you very much for that. I'm quite interested in, you talk about building a community and those kinds of activities and the benefits of doing so, but how do you actually create one in the first place? How do you get those people to come and play your game?
Yeah, that's great, and a great question. And obviously, it has to be an organic approach, right? You of course will have some media budgets that you might be pushing, but it's no good throwing tons of money at it if you don't have sort of an organic way of reaching out to these people. So, I think Mark made a really good point earlier around having kind of that authentic discussion. And developers, having spoken to many, I know that you are all very passionate about what you're doing and you're passionate about your game. You don't need to hide that. So, please do, when you're reaching out to people on Reddit, on Discord, when you're looking at spending your media money, make sure that you're maintaining that message and make sure that you are keeping kind of that voice and you're not allowing yourselves to become silenced or fall into the trap of thinking, I need to sound professional, I need to sound corporate. Nowadays gamers prefer sort of, and we see that kind of on Twitter, even with the major companies, gamers prefer that real voice and to understand that there are humans behind what they're doing and what they're making, and these humans really care about the game as much as they do. In terms of actually how to get the numbers, then I would certainly defer to my learned colleague around media. That's not my area. But I think that that voice is something that I would encourage everyone to hang on to as closely as possible.
Is there sort of a magic number of people that you need to be playing your game to, when you're going through the testing phase and just checking it and making sure that you're starting that engagement process? Is there sort of a magic number that you need to get to? You can say no.
I think it's...
question, but...
I would say there probably is, but annoyingly, it's going to really depend on what it is that you're doing, right?
Yeah,
so if your game is a single player game, of course, you don't need as many people as if your game is relying on loads of matchmaking sort of across the world. You're going to need different levels of testing. But as with all these things, it will scale. And, again, I'm sure Stuart will kind of talk about this in a bit more detail later on, but the way that you should be testing your games and getting feedback is it should be scalable. You start small and you grow it. There's no point trying to launch a massive, huge test of something without getting initial feedback first, because it's going to be time consuming, it's going to be expensive. You want to be checking in and saying, hey, this is kind of what we're thinking. Push it out to a few people, and if everyone hates it, at least you've not wasted a ton of time, and you can pivot and adjust it based on that.
That's excellent, thank you. And you mentioned about just in passing, talking about people getting disillusioned because the same people win the competitions, or perhaps there's some toxicity within some of those channels. Have you got a system for dealing with those particular issues, particularly the toxic opponent challenge?
Oh yes, absolutely. And we have our own policies. We'll of course sort of go along with what our client wants, but we also fall back on ultimately this should be fun for everybody. So we feel very strongly that we want to be involving kind of. So we feel very strongly that we should be keeping it a fun environment for everybody. So regardless of sort of what a client's policies are, Gfinity will be saying that we're not going to accept swearing, we're not going to accept insults, we're not going to be accepting the sorts of behaviours that we have seen at some tournaments before. And I will admit that does sometimes create a little bit of friction, but we would prefer to not run a tournament and to kind of lose out on that than to be encouraging those sorts of behaviours. And it is something that we've seen that our clients are actually quite pleased to see. I would say that pro players have been given a lot of space over the years, and we're now starting to see the negatives of that, and we're starting to see the players that are watching no longer really accepting that. And whereas a few years ago the larger publishers were worried about alienating pro players, we're now seeing that there's more of a standing up to them and saying, actually, no, we don't want to see this kind of behaviour. We want this to be accessible to everybody. And that applies both at a pro level, but then also at the grassroots level as well. And to your point, yes, of course, any platform worth its salt should be having tools in place to be highlighting that, both a kind of a mix of automatic and manual checks as well, to make sure it is fun for everybody.
Yeah, some interesting trends there around the attitude and the approach towards pro players. Now, talking about your platform, I don't really want to give you a chance to promote yourself too much, but I'm quite interested in if we look at if you look at the last 18 months, we've been in lockdown. There's been more games played and more time spent playing games, using it for social interaction and lots of other reasons. But have you seen a significant change in the approach from publishers and developers coming to you talking about the needs to build engagement and sort of esports strategies? Have you seen a change in that at all?
Definitely.
What have you seen, if so? So what's the change you've seen?
Yeah, definitely. I would say that the biggest change has actually come from the sponsors. The gaming industry in general is quite clued in terms of sort of how important tournaments and community is. I mean, generally, obviously, people still need support, but the biggest change has been from the brands who, with the absence of sporting events, are now looking to gaming and have recognized that gaming is pretty bomb-proof in terms of it's very accessible. We can always run tournaments. We certainly saw it last year with our F1 leagues, in that we had it all planned to be a physical event and then had to turn it around to be an online event. And all of the sponsors were amazed that this was even possible. And we're starting to see sort of more and more sponsors thinking, hey, what's this esports buzzword thing? How can we be getting involved in it? But certainly, internally within the gaming industry, we're seeing more of a focus on the community. And I would say that isn't so much a COVID reason and a lockdown reason, but a more natural progression. We see that in media, more money is now being spent on influencers than on TV advertising, for example. And I think everybody is starting to recognize that a player is not just in one place. Yes, they're playing your game. Yes, but then, they're also watching YouTube and they're reading articles and they're watching TV. It needs to be an entire approach, and you need to consider their lifestyle rather than just thinking about esports in silo and then this one little grassroots in silo. It all needs to come together and support your overall goals.
That's fabulous. Nice positive note to end on then as well. So thank you very much, Catherine, for joining us today. And now we're going to move on to our final speaker. And thanks to the audience as well for asking such insightful questions. Keep them coming in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Stuart Muckley. Hello, Stuart.
Hey, Sam. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. And you, having a good day?
Yeah, good so far. I'm just hoping people have got any ears left after an hour of listening to me.
We've covered a lot, haven't we? And perhaps a little bit over schedule. I'm going to get straight on with you then. So, Stuart, thank you very much for joining us. Over to you.
Cool. Right. Good to meet you all. I hope this is interesting for you all. Right, let's try sharing. Let's hope that we don't get any issues.
That looks good. Yeah, all good.
Oh, wow. Okay, there we go. We're good. Okay, so trotting straight on then. So Mark said something interesting earlier on about being a fat, middle-aged, bald man, not being able to do cosplay. As you can see there, it's true, and my impression of James Bond is pretty awful. I'm Stuart Muckley. I'm the CEO of Code Wizards. I won't belittle you by reading out what's on all the slides that are there, but we do game tech and we do esports tech. And really, we work at the back end of games to help games developers, studios and publishers build the game that they want to in co-op and co-dev and basically get it out to market in the way that they want it. We've built a load of tournament platforms. I'm awfully British about this, I'm sorry, so I can't give it a big rah, rah, rah. But as far as we know, we are the global leader in tournament systems that are out there after being building them for the last 7 or 8 years. So the obligatory slide that's here. What do we mean by esports? Well, for us, it's any competitive play, online or physical. As Catherine and Mark both mentioned, this is quite a broad church, really. We got single player games and speed running that's out there. We got multiplayer games, either turn-based, you could have your Hearthstones or whatever else. You can have fast-paced FPSs. There's it's a massive, wide variety of that right there. And then we've got battle royale and racing games as well, all of which present different challenges on how you want to build your esports modes, how you want to manage those modes, and what you want to do for the people who are playing the game, because ultimately that's who you're targeting. So one of the phrases that you'll probably hear me use it quite a few times are TO. So TO means tournament operator, and these are the guys that are running the big tournaments and the big events that are out there. So that'll be people like Gfinity, or events that Mark and the guys at Heaven Media may run, as well as James and Co at ESL. But there's multiple out there, so I'm not trying to push one brand or another. So as a games developer, you've really got to understand your audience. So as well as the players that are out there, if you want to be at any of these events, you've got challenges which you need to give and you need to help the tournament operator with. So there's just a few things on here. There's loads more, but hopefully it gives you some ideas. So if we're talking about grassroots, so lots of people playing, this is where most game developers start, and hopefully your game is fun to play. That's pretty essential, right? If it's not, it's going to be rubbish and no one's going to want to do it. If we're talking about pro events, pro play, and things that people watch, again, it seems obvious, but it's something that we see time and time again, which isn't catered for. It needs to be fun to watch. Now, that could be silly little things like on the screen, things just aren't obvious what's going on, the different opponents aren't marked out, but all those things really dramatically change the way it is. So you've really got to consider that as part and parcel of it. For tournament operators, running tournaments costs money. They're businesses, they run these things commercially, that's what they need to do. So anything which reduces the amount of humans that are needed to run things has a benefit from a cash perspective, because you don't have to pay people to run this. But more importantly, it means that you can get more games in, which is more fun for people. Those people will come back. Toxicity was mentioned a bit ago, but fairness and cheating are a big part of that as well. Nobody wants to play games in a tournament where somebody is cheating. It's just not right. On the other hand, at most tournaments, if it's a grassroots, I don't want to play something where I get rinsed in the first round and I'm out. That's boring. I want to play. I'm here to play. In a pro event, that might be the exact opposite though. We need to whittle out the worst players very, very quickly so we can get a more interesting, watchable event at the end. Stability. As developers, we see this time and time again. People run the game and they run it in small silos. They run it locally. It works beautifully on their LAN as developers. It's great. They run it with a bunch of friends that are in the same territory. It's amazing, but it doesn't make it reliable or stable. You've really got to hit those things. We'll come back to managing play and why it's tricky in a little bit, but we'll go through that. The next thing, which a lot of developers don't understand, is that tournament operators don't differentiate by offering different tournament types in the main. They have their own identity and preferences and how they work. So it's interesting and really important that you need to understand what those are when you speak to tournament operators about how they're going to do things and how it's going to go. And lastly, and I think Mark and Catherine both talked to this as well, esports at a pro level and for watching is all about stories. So you've got to make this stuff available so that they can tell these stories. If you think about something like a football match that's going on, as people are commentating at the time, they're not just saying person A passed the ball to person B, wasn't that amazing? They're saying, well, in the last 10 matches, person A hasn't scored any goals, or this is the biggest run he's done, or she was injured for the last 6 matches. So it's all this narrative and stories which go on alongside it, because as humans, we love stories. It's hardwired into us, and esports feeds into exactly that same mechanism. So how do we make a game loved? Well, we've got to make it loved to play. That's obvious, but also people love to be involved. So if we can find a way for tournament operators and the players to be involved in there, then we're on to a winner. This develops a community, everything builds up, they introduce new people to it, so it'll actually acquire new people as well as being a retention mechanism for you and your game. We need to be able to make it easy to organize. So whether it's, me and a bunch of my friends want to play against each other on a Friday evening, or it's ESL is putting on a worldwide event of our game, it needs to be easy to organize. If it's not, they'll go to a different game because they have to. These things have got to be managed, and they're difficult to do at the best of times. So making it as easy as you possibly can for people will massively influence how many tournament operators and people themselves will take on your game. I mentioned the stories and making data visible. So one of my favorite ones on this is Overwatch. If you go to the Overwatch site, you can see a bunch of stuff about each player, how they're playing, what they're doing, etc. It's great. And this is building stories. So by the time I go to play a game, I can go and look how, a colleague of mine like Martin, I can go and see how he plays. I can get a good idea of what it is. I can look at the channels, I can watch his play. All these things build into it. And this is how I'm talking to my friends, and we're enjoying ourselves as well. This also allows the casters and presenters at tournaments to talk about these things, so that they know a lot more about what's going on. So for instance, if I've played Martin 55 times over the last 2 years and I've only won once, that's a brilliant story to tell, So anything that we can make these things visible with will help that massively. Watchable we mentioned before, but I've put it in again because it's just so important, and we see it so often that this is missing. So I mentioned a bit earlier about just making things visible on the screen. There's other things that'll be alongside it as well. How do I understand if it's a win or a loss if I've never played this game and I'm just watching it? How do I understand what's going on within the game? So if there's a drafting system before, what are we drafting for? How are we doing this? And very often, just very simple things like changing the size of the font or adding animations or some kind of description alongside it will massively change how engaging that is. And then tournament types. Everybody in esports used to think about single elimination tournaments. So it was the de facto default for everybody that was out there. So all we need to do is we have a tournament. It's a bracket system that runs. It's a nice big shaped V. A plays B. If A wins, they move on to the next round and B is out. As I mentioned earlier, single elimination is really boring if you turn up for an event and you want to play, because you want to play. You don't want to be out in the first round. So that might be a double elimination instead. So you've got 2 chances before you're out. Or it could be a league. So, just like we have a league out there for football, everyone plays everyone. It's a really interesting way to do it. However, if you're looking at numbers, this is where the parallels between physical sports and electronic sports really breaks down. In physical sports, we can have a football league of 20, 30 different teams playing. Amazing, it's great. We can work it out over a season. If we do that with a league of 50,000 players, that's going to be virtually impossible for everyone to play each other. And so whether you pick a ladder, or it's a leaderboard, or it's a custom system based on lives like a clash, you've really got to consider what tournament types you want to put in there and what that audience is, because some will be for tournaments and watched events, and others will be the other way around, and they'll be for players playing each other and just enjoying what they want to do with your game. So my bit's all about the tech. That's where we're from. We're a bunch of techies, so hopefully this isn't too boring. There's a bunch of ways to make this much easier for players out there and for tournament operators and the tournament platforms to link into things. So the easiest is a data dump. It's incredibly easy to do. Virtually any game can do this. It won't even impact your team very much as part of the development process. get the data for each of the matches, get the basic public data for each of the players, and just shove them somewhere on a cloud storage. Give them a naming standard so people can find them. So if my identity is tool user, that's awesome. If I go to XYZ URL/tool user, there's the Stuart Muckley profile. Amazing. If it's a team, you know, you could go exactly the same /team/code wizards. There it is. And you can structure it however you want. People can then use that to pull the data down, sort it, play with it, work out their own league sites, introduce or interact with a tournament platform that's out there. There's a million gazillion things that are going on. So at the very basics, if you want to be done for, if you want to be in the esports arena, data dump should be your very minimum starting point for it. If you want to go up a level, APIs are awesome. League of Legends is my favorite example for this. They've been pioneering it for ages, and the Riot guys have done a great job. We have an API out there. People can call into it. You get a key so you can manage the amount of access that's going on. You can make sure that nobody's DDoSing you. You can make sure that nobody's abusing your data as well. It's pretty fast to do. You know, all the clouds have got really good support for API, so you can build that. It is going to impact your team a little bit because you have to get that information from somewhere, store it from somewhere, and make it manageable. However, an API makes your game massively more attractive to both tournament operators, tournament platforms, and individuals. The public information website is kind of the mix of the two. This is what I mentioned about Overwatch. You know, a way to look at the profiles for the players that are in there, and the matches and the history, just in a nice, easy to read format, so that even the most casual public person can just go and look at it and see what's there. Integration. So Catherine spoke a bit about the Gfinity platform back there, and that's a great example. So the ideal way to run esports play is that we're heavily integrated. I play a match versus Sam. Sam wins, the system's automatically updated. Sam progresses to the next round. I go into the losers bracket. Awesome. Neither of us had to type anything. It's very hard to cheat, etc. So it's a great way to go. However, if you integrate into one platform, yeah, you've got to be really sure that you've got a great deal with them, that you're working forwards, because that's the platform you're going to use for everything. Now, if that's embedded into your game, that's cool. If you're going to be across the world, you need to pick somebody with a global reach that's out there. So, you know, you got your Gfinities, your ESLs, and a bunch of the others that are out there that can support that. Some of the smaller ones can't. Lastly, for toxicity, user management is something that loads of people always forget. You know, they should be via your live ops system, plug it in there. You can manage users, you can ban people, but you can also suspend them. At all points, we have to remember that a lot of the time that people say things, you know, they don't actually mean it, or, well, sometimes they do, but a lot of the time they don't mean it. So suspending people rather than banning them is a really good mechanism, because, you know, it's a slap on the wrist rather than, you know, taking them out of the ecosystem completely. If you look at any of the systems that are out there, I mean, EGL is a great example. They've got a great suspension system that's out there, and they use that to great effect to essentially give people warnings and stop them doing things before they actually have to go to the, you know, the GACs and cut them off and ban them completely. So, internal tech steps. So these are the things that your players don't see, but they're massively important. So matchmaking, it's obvious, right? If you are randomly picking people to play, that's cool for a while and it's great. And if you've got a small community, that's brilliant. However, as things get more competitive, I want more challenging matches. I want to be matched with people where it makes sense. Secondly, it works for both ways. So if I'm a pro player, I don't want to play noobs all the time because I'm just rinsing them. It's over in seconds. What's the point? From the other way around, for noobs, if they're always getting pro players playing against them, or, you know, excellent skilled players, it's awful. You know, I'm not actually getting a game. I'm in for 10 seconds and then I'm out immediately. So your matchmaker is really, really important. But the other thing is, if you want tournament operators and people to run their own tournaments within your system, you need some form of private lobbies. Could be as simple as sharing a key with people so they can join. You know, there's a million ways to do this, but you just need some way to do it so that the tournament operators can manage it rather than random people piling in all the time. Cheating. Depending on how serious you're getting about this stuff, things will increase over time. People will find vulnerabilities in your game. People will try and hack it for fun. Two things you can do. So there's anti-cheat solutions out there. You can plug them in. That's great. Work really well. The biggest thing, and I'm not advocating doing this day one for what I'll say on the next slide, server-side authoritative for multiplayer is the way to go. What that means is that none of your game clients are making the decision, so you can't hack a game client and change things massively. The server can manage these things. Reliability, and sorry, I'm going to race through this a bit because I know you've all been listening for a long time and I don't want to bore people. So we've got to build for scale. So there's no point having a bunch of servers out there and no one can get on them. You've got to basically make sure that we have the right amount of servers at any time. We'll come on to that in a second. Why? Reliability. If you sell in-app purchases and skins, etc., within your game, and that is your monetization model, and your game keeps crashing, you will not make money. You have to be reliable. You need to be able to manage things. Things will go wrong, things will crash, sometimes things won't scale. Even though clouds supposedly have infinite capacity, of course they don't. There's physical limits there, so sometimes you'll hit those hard limits, and you need to be able to handle that. So you need a really good command and control setup. You need to be able to manage this. And the last part is visibility. You need to monitor everything, so you know what's going on. If things are crashing and you don't know about it, you can't fix it. Your players will start moaning at you, but they'll moan at you way after the crash has actually occurred and you can do something about it. If you release a patch and there's a problem with it, your players will tell you about it. But again, there's a delay. If you're monitoring carefully, you'll be in there right from the start. Now for the buts. Budget and income are really important things. Yeah, nobody's got an infinite budget as far as I'm aware. I know it'd be beautiful and amazing, but it doesn't really exist. So if you have a multi-season game, my advice is start small, build up. Don't build everything at the start. Don't presume that you know everything. Let the players tell you what's important to them. If that means that you start off with non-authoritative multiplayer at the start and you add that later, that's cool. Get your community moving and, you know, engage with them, tell them what you're doing and how you're changing things. Awesome. They'll love you for it. The next thing is that servers cost money. If you have a server-based model for running your game, it's ideal, it's great. But the amount of times people have told me that they're doing a free-to-play, they're expecting 10,000 concurrent players and they can get 20 people on a server, and you do the maths and they just look at it and start crying. Servers cost real money. So as well as being able to scale, you need to also be able to descale, bring down the number of servers that you've got during the night or for periods where they're not playing, etc. Your money needs to come in before you pay the cloud providers unless you've got a massive cash flow. Most games haven't. Territories and gamer types. This is becoming more and more important as time goes on. Different territories play games in different ways, so they may want different tournament modes that you offer in those areas. If you've got a live ops system and if you've got data around that, you can do that. If you don't, you're guessing, and guessing is bad. You know, we're all full of prejudice and bias around what we think and what we don't think is good or bad about a game. But in reality, we don't know. Data will tell you what you need to know so you can do that. And last of all, the best part of it, I'm going to shut up for a bit. If you need more information or you'd like to speak to us, we always love speaking. We're on the UK Games Slack channel, so you can pick me up directly. Send us an email at stuart@codewizards or hello@codewizards, and we'll pick it up and get back to you. And Sam, I'm going to shut up.
Thanks very much, Stuart. A whistle-stop tour through some very, very complicated things there and all of the different options. If a studio literally just started up, what would be the first sort of 2 or 3 things you'd say to them for them to focus on? I mean, obviously it depends on the scale and what they want to achieve, but is there a sort of a page one starting point?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, my number one is always live ops. If you haven't integrated a live ops tool, you know, and you think your game has got longevity, you're crazy. You need to do it now, you know, as quickly as you possibly can. Get it baked in. It costs a lot less to do at the start than it does at the end. And it'll give you all the switches and dials and levers that you need to make your game awesome. The second thing is, from an esports perspective, you've got to be really self-critical about what kind of modes work for you. So it's great to look at everything else and think it's the same, but if you've got a small community, then leagues are amazing. They're incredibly sticky. Everyone enjoys it. You can get that play, and it really builds community, because the story I'm telling is I'm playing Sam tonight. It's amazing. I'm going to rinse him. It's going to be great. And then Leon tomorrow is going to destroy me. Brilliant. We can go through all that stuff. There's no point having a ladder of 200 people. It's boring. However, when you hit season 2, that ladder might be the way to go. So you've always got to have a projection about where you're going to and when you think you're going to hit it, and design that into the modes. And lastly, you've just got to think of casual play as well. So you've got, this is the hardcore, and this is great. This is fully retained players who get to play on a regular basis. It's great to have something like a Clash Royale kind of mode where you can go in, you can play a bunch of rounds. It's all asynchronous, so it doesn't really matter. But at the end, you know, a bunch of you win and you get a good feeling out of it, and you can launch it as an event. Yeah, and it's just working out what works. But if you're going to hit the if you're going to go to various events, and we're all really hoping they turn up again. I mean, just look at something like Rainbow Six Siege. It's incredible to watch. It's amazing. Yeah. I mean, it's better to watch than play, in my personal opinion, but you can go to one of these events. It's on a big TV screen. You can sit down, you can watch it, and you can have fun. Rocket League's an excellent example of a game where you just get it immediately. You don't need to be told what Rocket League is. It just gives you extra things. So if you play it, it's awesome. If you turn up at the Gfinity Arena, like I did with my son a couple of years back to watch the World Finals, amazing. You know, you'll just go and have fun with it. So it's really understanding where your game is. If it's super complex, watchability is going to be hard. If it's super simple, watchability might be hard, but it's going to be easier to get in there. And it's just trying to find that golden balance between the two. But you'll only get that by showing these player things that are out there and asking them what they think.
Yeah, I mean, the flexibility of systems is so important. And I guess it's changing all the time, isn't it? You're constantly, I guess, getting companies coming to you saying, I want to try something a little bit different. Just have a go. Just experiment and see what sticks. A question came through from Mark, actually, that I think you've answered, but let's just check you have. He asked how important APIs can be, and you did reference that. You're very positive about what Riot have done. What's the significance of APIs?
So this is my personal belief, but I think we're moving into, you know, esports 2.0. We've been through all the traditional modes which are based on physical sports, and we're now just about to enter the next era of esports. So in the previous era, people typed in their results. So I'm going to pick on Catherine. I play Catherine, and at the end of it, we both type our results. And if they concur, that's cool. And if they don't, one of us has to provide a screenshot. You know, that's pretty awful, really, as an experience. That really, really sucks. APIs solve that problem because it means that we can integrate directly. So players can do what they want to do, which is get on with the business of playing, and tournament operators can do what they want to do, which is get on with the tournament and get it running. So they're massively important. But also from a data perspective, I mean, if you look at community sites based around, I mean, Riot, you know, the classic example, there's a million out there about League of Legends, tracking different aspects that they find most interesting. And it also allows for this kind of esports 2.0 variability. So, you know, we've seen things like Fortnite matches where the winners are no longer based on who actually comes first, but who gets the most headshots. So it really allows you to mix and play around with the game in ways that were never intended and give a different experience with a different kind of sub-game within the game.
Makes sense. That's perfect. And for anyone out there, we'll obviously be sharing the slides afterwards and Stuart's details. Stuart is exceptionally amenable, always approachable. Get in touch, find out how his business can help you with all of that. Huge experience that we've got. Indeed, all of our speakers today have talked very knowledgeably about their particular areas of interest. We will make the slides available to everyone that's registered for the event afterwards. I'd like to thank you all for coming along and listening today and participating, asking so many insightful questions. Really good set of questions today. So thank you very much. Keep an eye out for future events from Yuki, whether on esports or other areas within the games industry. yuki.org.uk. Go and have a look at that. There's an events section on there. There's always things going on. But finally, I'd just like to do a virtual round of applause for our speakers today, for James, for Mark, for Catherine, and for Stuart. Thank you very much for joining us today. Have a good rest of your busy working days. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks.